Life has a way of presenting surprises when you least anticipate them. That's exactly what occurred to me on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday evening. I had just returned home from work, my heels clicking against the wooden floor as I entered the house. The day had been exhausting and draining, and all I wanted was to relax in a warm bath and let the tension fade. Little did I know, that night would leave an unforgettable impression on my life. The house was silent when I stepped inside, which wasn't unusual. My husband, Greg, had mentioned earlier that he would be attending a late meeting, leaving only Tyler, his son from a previous marriage, at home. Tyler, 20, was a reserved yet courteous young man who seldom caused any trouble. He worked part-time at the local hardware store and spent most of his free time in his room. While we weren't particularly close, we had a polite relationship built on mutual respect. As I placed my bag on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, I noticed Tyler's truck parked in the driveway. Strange, I thought. He usually worked the evening shift. I called his name casually, my voice echoing through the empty house. No reply. Assuming he was in his room with his headphones on or just resting, I didn't think much of it. After finishing my water, I decided to head upstairs to change into something more comfortable. Passing by the bathroom, I noticed the faint sound of running water and the door slightly ajar. This struck me as odd. Tyler was always very particular about his privacy and always closed doors firmly, especially the bathroom door. My curiosity piqued. I hesitated for a moment before gently pushing the door open a little more. What I saw froze me in place. Tyler was standing at the sink, his back to me, shoulders hunched as if focused on something. His movements were awkward, almost panicked. I noticed he was shirtless, with his jeans hanging loosely on his hips, and in his hands, he appeared to be scrubbing something with a washcloth, though it was out of sight. The creak of the door startled him, and he quickly spun around, his eyes wide with panic. "Oh my God, I didn't hear you come in," he said, his voice trembling. I stood frozen, equally startled, my gaze darting between him and the washcloth, a wave of awkwardness crashing over me. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, quickly averting my gaze. "I didn't mean to intrude." My heart raced in my chest as I reached for the doorknob, ready to leave and give him the space he clearly wanted. But before I could close the door, Tyler's voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, his tone pleading. "It's not what you think." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to run down the hallway and forget this ever happened, but another part was curious. His voice didn't carry the defensiveness of someone caught in wrongdoing. Instead, it was filled with embarrassment and desperation. Despite my better judgment, I turned back, keeping my gaze on his face. "Okay," I said cautiously. "What's going on?" Tyler looked down, his face turning bright red. He seemed to struggle to find the right words, his hands nervously fidgeting with the washcloth. Finally, he sighed deeply and said, "It's just, I didn't know who else to ask." "Ask about what?" I prompted gently, curiosity outweighing my discomfort. "It's personal," he admitted, avoiding eye contact. "I've been dealing with some stuff, and I don't know what to do. Dad's not here, and you're the only one I can talk to." His vulnerability took me by surprise. Tyler had always been independent, rarely opening up about personal matters. The fact that he was turning to me for help made me pause. I stepped into the bathroom, closing the door slightly behind me to give us some privacy. "All right," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" Tyler hesitated before speaking, stumbling over his words as he tried to explain the discomfort he'd been feeling. I listened patiently, piecing together his fragmented explanations. It became clear that this was a sensitive issue, one he was too embarrassed to discuss with his father. As he spoke, I felt a pang of empathy. It's never easy to ask for help, especially on such a personal matter. "Okay," I said after a moment of thought. "First of all, it's good that you're paying attention to these things. It shows you care about your health. Second, there's no shame in asking questions or seeking advice." Tyler looked up at me, his eyes filled with gratitude and relief. "Really? You don't think it's weird?" "Not at all," I reassured him with a smile. I reassured him that it's common for everyone to have questions about their body at some point, and that it's completely natural. I spent the next few minutes giving him advice to the best of my ability, drawing from my own experience and knowledge. I aimed to keep the conversation as straightforward and practical as possible, avoiding anything that might make him feel more uneasy. As the conversation went on, the initial discomfort began to fade. Tyler seemed to ease up, and I could tell he appreciated having someone to talk to. By the time we finished, he appeared noticeably calmer and even managed a small smile. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I didn't think I could talk to anyone about this." I returned his smile, feeling a sense of relief that the tension had passed. "You're welcome, Tyler. And remember, it's always okay to ask for help. No one has all the answers." As I left the bathroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was happy that I could be there for Tyler when he needed someone to confide in. On the other hand, the situation had been so unexpected and unusual that I wasn't sure how to process it. Something about the encounter felt meaningful, like it had marked a shift in our relationship. I just didn't know what it meant or how it would unfold in the coming days. I tried to push away the odd feeling as I went about the rest of my evening, but it stayed in the back of my mind, like a shadow. The house was quiet, the only noise being the faint hum of the air conditioning. Greg came home late that night, tired but cheerful, completely unaware of the unusual conversation that had taken place in his absence. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in my mind. Something had changed, but I couldn't quite pinpoint it. All I knew was that life in our home would never feel exactly the same again. The days following that unexpected conversation were, to say the least, strange. It wasn't that anything overtly dramatic happened. In fact, everything on the surface seemed normal. Greg continued with his work as usual. Tyler kept up his part-time shifts and studying, and I continued balancing my duties at home and at work. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, subtle but palpable, between Tyler and me. I couldn't stop thinking about that evening. Not because anything inappropriate had occurred, but because of how vulnerable Tyler had been. It wasn't often that someone so reserved opened up in such an honest and raw way. I wasn't sure if he felt the same weight of the moment, but for me, it lingered like a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. One evening, about a week after the conversation, I found myself alone in the kitchen preparing dinner. Greg had called to say he'd be late again, which was becoming more frequent due to a big project at work. Tyler's truck was parked outside, but the house was unusually silent. I assumed he was upstairs in his room, perhaps lost in one of his books or studying for a test. As I chopped vegetables, the soft sound of footsteps coming down the stairs drew my attention. I looked up to see Tyler standing in the doorway. He looked unsure, as though debating whether to come in or leave. "Hey, Tyler," I greeted him with a warm smile. "Dinner will be ready soon. Are you hungry?" He nodded, but didn't come further into the room. "Yeah, a little," he replied, his voice softer than usual. There was a pause, one that stretched just a bit too long to feel comfortable. Sensing he wanted to say something, I put down the knife and turned to face him fully. "Everything okay?" I asked. Tyler shuffled his feet, looking down for a moment before meeting my gaze. "Yeah, I wanted to thank you again for, the other day," he said, his words catching me off guard. I hadn't expected him to bring it up, especially after a week of silence on the matter. "Of course," I said gently. "I'm glad I could help." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "I just didn't think anyone would understand," he admitted. "You didn't make me feel weird about it. That meant a lot." There was something deeply sincere in his tone, something that made my heart ache just a little. "I'm glad you felt comfortable enough to talk to me," I replied. "That's what family is for." Tyler gave a small smile before stepping into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, watching as I resumed chopping vegetables. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the only sound being the rhythmic click of the knife against the cutting board. "Do you ever feel like there are things you can't talk about with Dad?" he asked suddenly, his voice tentative. The question caught me by surprise. I paused mid-chop, glancing at him with raised eyebrows. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know. It's just, he's great and all, but sometimes I feel like he wouldn't understand certain things. Or maybe he wouldn't know how to respond." I thought carefully about his words before answering. "I think it's normal to feel that way sometimes. Everyone has things they struggle to talk about, even with the people they're closest to. But that doesn't mean they don't care. Tyler nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. Yeah, I guess you're right. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, I felt a sense of relief. It seemed like the awkwardness that had hung between us was finally starting to fade. By the time dinner was ready, Tyler seemed more at ease, even cracking a joke or two as we ate together. It was a far cry from the tension of the previous week, and for that, I was thankful. However, life, as it often does, has a way of testing equilibrium just when you believe things are settling. One evening, Greg suggested we have a family movie night. It was unusual for the three of us to spend time together like this, given our conflicting schedules, so I readily agreed. We gathered in the living room, snacks in hand, and settled onto the couch. Greg took the recliner, leaving the main sofa for Tyler and me. The movie started, a lighthearted comedy that had us laughing within minutes. Everything felt normal, even comfortable. But as the evening progressed, I noticed something. Tyler appeared distracted, his laughter slightly delayed, his gaze not fully focused on the screen. At one point, I caught him glancing at me out of the corner of my eye. When our gazes met, he quickly looked away, his cheeks tinged with pink. I dismissed it as nothing, attributing it to typical awkwardness. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't ignore the subtle changes in his behavior. He seemed uneasy, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt and avoiding direct eye contact. When the movie ended, he was the first to excuse himself, mumbling something about needing to get up early for work. As I cleared the empty snack bowls and turned off the TV, Greg stretched and yawned. That was fun, he said, offering me a warm smile. We should do this more often. I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere. Something about Tyler's behavior bothered me, and a quiet unease settled in my chest. I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was overthinking things. Over the next few days, I noticed Tyler becoming more distant. He avoided me whenever he could, retreating to his room or leaving the house for hours at a time. When we did cross paths, his responses were curt, his gaze firmly fixed anywhere but on me. It was a sharp contrast to the openness he'd shown before, and I couldn't help but wonder what had changed. One evening, after Greg had gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. The soft glow of the lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and I stared at the blank TV screen, lost in thought. The house was quiet except for the faint creak of the floorboards as Tyler moved around upstairs. I was startled out of my thoughts by the sound of footsteps descending the stairs. Looking up, I saw Tyler standing in the doorway, his expression uncertain. Hey, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Hey, I replied, sitting up straighter. What's up? He hesitated, then stepped into the room. Can we talk? Of course, I said, motioning for him to sit. What's on your mind? Tyler sat down on the edge of the couch, his posture rigid. He avoided my gaze, staring down at his hands as he nervously fiddled with the fabric of his sweatpants. I've been acting strange lately, he admitted after a long pause, and I think you've noticed. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. It's just, I don't know how to explain it, he said, his voice trembling. I've been feeling really confused about a lot of things, and I don't know who to talk to about it. His words hit me like a freight train. I wasn't sure what he was trying to say, but the raw emotion in his voice was undeniable. My heart ached for him, but I also felt a rising sense of anxiety. What was he trying to tell me? Tyler's confession lingered between us, the silence intensifying every creak of the house and every breath we took. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped together, trying to appear calm, though my heart was pounding. Whatever he was about to say, I wanted to be ready for it. Tyler, I began softly, it's okay. You can tell me anything, you know that, right? He nodded, but his eyes remained focused on his hands. It's just, I've been feeling like I don't belong anywhere. I don't know who I am or what I'm supposed to do. His voice cracked, and he quickly wiped his eyes, embarrassed by the emotion showing. The other night when you helped me, it made me realize something. My breath hitched. There it was, the moment I had both feared and anticipated. I didn't know what he was about to say, but I could feel the weight of his words pressing on both of us. It made me realize that you're the only person who's ever really listened to me, he continued, his voice barely audible. You didn't judge me or make me feel foolish. You simply cared, and I've never had that before. Not even from Dad. His words hit me hard, and I felt a powerful mix of sympathy and caution. Tyler, I said softly, choosing my words carefully, I care about you because you're family. Sometimes when we're struggling, it's easy to mistake kindness for something else, but I want you to know that I'm always here for you. He finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else I couldn't quite identify. I know, he said quietly. I just wanted to thank you for everything. I smiled, hoping to ease the tension. You're welcome, Tyler. And remember, it's okay to feel lost sometimes. Everyone does, but you'll find your way. I'm sure of it. The vulnerability in his expression softened, and he nodded. Thanks. I should probably head to bed. Good night. Good night, I replied, watching as he walked up the stairs. Once he was out of sight, I let out a deep sigh, the weight of the conversation settling in. Over the next few days, Tyler seemed lighter, as though a heavy load had been lifted. He was more talkative, even cracking jokes during dinner and joining me for morning coffee when Greg was already at work. It was a welcome change, and I felt relieved that we had moved past the tension of the past few weeks. But as life settled back into a routine, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Tyler's words lingered in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was more I could do to support him. His struggles reminded me that even the people closest to us can carry burdens we don't see. One weekend, Greg suggested we take a day trip to the lake. It was his way of trying to strengthen the bond between us, and I thought it was a fantastic idea. The weather was perfect, clear skies and a gentle breeze. We packed a picnic, loaded the car, and headed out for a day of relaxation at the lake. We spent hours swimming, playing frisbee, and relaxing by the shore. Tyler seemed genuinely happy, laughing and joking with Greg in a way I hadn't seen before. It warmed my heart to see them bonding, and I felt hopeful that this trip was a turning point for us. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues across the water, we sat on the beach, soaking in the last moments of the day. Greg had fallen asleep on a blanket, his snores blending with the sound of the waves. Tyler and I sat a few feet apart, watching the horizon. Thanks for coming today, he said after a long pause. It's been nice, just spending time together. I smiled, feeling a wave of peace wash over me. I'm glad. We should do things like this more often. He nodded, his eyes still on the water. Yeah, I think it helps. We sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, the unspoken understanding between us enough to fill the quiet. When Greg woke up, we packed our things and headed home. The drive was filled with laughter and stories about the day. That night, as I lay next to Greg in bed, I reflected on how far we had come as a family. The past few weeks had been difficult, but they had also brought us closer in ways I hadn't expected. Tyler's journey was far from over, but I felt confident he was on the right path, and so were we.